If you've been watching my channel, you've seen me jump through a lot of hoops using this saw to rip wood. It's about time I made a proper fence to cut straight lines. Now there's two ways to do this. You can buy the manufacturer's fence that screws in here and acts as an edge for the saw blade, and those are great. They don't work in all circumstances. Instead, I'm going to make a little bit different fence, 4 feet long. Now you can make this 8 feet long if you like, which will help you for ripping plywood, but 4 feet is as long as I want to carry around with me in my van. Building it is very simple. You'll need a piece of quality wood, preferably a hardwood like this. It needs to be straight, at least in one direction. Now this board's got just a slight warp going this way, but as long as it's rail straight going this direction, it'll be fine. And you'll want to check that with a straight edge before going ahead and doing your build. Now don't worry about getting this too exact. Just make sure you have a little bit of extra material past the width of the saw. You'll see why in a minute. I'm going to go ahead and attach this piece by drilling and countersinking a couple of screws in from the underside of the material. If you're using plywood or hardboard for this substrate, go ahead and use some glue. But since I'm using this whiteboard and pretty much nothing's going to stick well to it, I'm only going to be using screws for this. Get this board in as straight as possible with a little bit of extra space on the end, but don't fuss over it too much because we're going to trim it at the end. Because the clearance on my saw is about only a ½ inch, I had to make that fence rail quite short. Unfortunately, I've only got 1-inch screws, so I'm going to have to file them down after I put them in. Now I'm going to trim this board down. And this job is just as simple as everything else. Now I'm going to use the other side so this fence works both ways. And make sure, of course, that I don't cut my table. Now, this fence will work great as is if you use it with clamps. However, you've seen me use screws a lot to hold things down. So what I'm going to do is pre-drill some holes for screws and throw in a couple little washers. Maybe I'll glue them in place on top so that I can reuse those holes over and over again without damaging my fence. I'll be using this Forstner bit to countersink for the washers. Now these are a bit different from the other bits you've seen me use. They have the advantage of cutting a flat bottomed hole like this, and they don't tear up the wood nearly as much. On the other hand, they work an awful lot slower and they're not good for making really deep holes. I'll pre-drill the holes so the screws can pass through freely. I've glued the washers in place with a little dab of glue. Almost any glue will work, except for probably wood glue because it doesn't adhere well to metal. I've also stuck nails through the washers. That's just to hold them in place while they glue up. I'm going to add one more optional detail onto this project. If I put a board down here and make sure it's at a right angle, I'll be able to use this as a right angle fence. Now there's some advantages to having this installed, like having a right angle fence. The disadvantage is if you want to use this on a flat piece of wood like a plywood for a long rip, well, this block is going to get in the way. So what I'm going to do is screw mine in place so it can be easily removed. If I had the storage space, I'd make 3. I'd make one 8-foot one for ripping long boards. I'd make one 4-foot one general purpose with a T on it. And I'd make a short one for doing little jobs, although most of the time I just do that with a speed square. I'm going to go ahead and install this now. Now that we've built it, I guess I should show you how to use it, and it really is very simple. Now I've got this piece of MDF here, and I want to cut out a board this size. I've gone ahead and marked it with a heavy permanent marker. By the way, that's not really a best practice. because the line is too fat. You really should mark things with a marking knife or a very sharp pencil. But it doesn't show up on video well, so I'll be using this. I just set my board in place, line it up with my pre-made line, clamp it to the board, and then I can just set my saw right here. You'll see here at the end why I didn't make that fence longer. You're just going to end up cutting it off anyway. It is tempting to have a nice long T-square here, but it just takes up more storage space and you'll cut it off the first time you use it. So anyway, that's how you make this circular saw fence and how to use it. I hope you enjoy this little project, and if you find it useful, please let me know.